What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's
The
get to it.
Mercedes R-class was born in 2005 on a wave of inspiration from the Germans' quite steady sales of B-class compact vans and their then still one-volume A-class. The company was full of enthusiasm to capture a new segment of large premium minivans, and the costs and efforts to develop a new model were reduced due to the almost ready aggregate base. The large car was built on the platform of M and GL class crossovers, at first not even removing the all-wheel drive, which was a good competitive advantage in the segment. However, the Germans' hopes for success were not justified. The planned figure of 50,000 sold cars per year could not be reached, even in the best 2006 to 2007 years, and further demand fell to 10 to 15,000 units per year and continued to decline. The model appeared in Russia in 2007, but it failed to revitalize the almost non-existent segment of large minivans. In addition, the basic short wheelbase and rear-wheel drive versions, which appeared in 2007, which could have attracted some buyers, by price, were not brought to us. As a result, at the start in 2007, the Russian prices started from about 1.65 million rubles, and by the restyling of 2010 rose to 2.7 million, not counting the version of 500 with a V8 engine, which cost 3.5 million. As a result, our buyers could not understand why they needed the R-class, if for a small extra payment it was possible to take a real crossover, so annual sales fluctuated at the level of 100 to 300 cars. Accordingly, the secondary market on the model is rather modest. At the moment of writing the material, there were only 60 cars for sale on Avito. Let's see if all of them deserve attention. If we talk about the condition of the body, the vast majority of cars can boast of good preservation. Their audience is economic, and these cars rarely fall into casual hands, so the care is usually good, which, together with quality painting and galvanizing, allows to maintain the condition for years. Visible defects are usually limited to age-related issues. The sills behind the front wheels are peeling, and without timely touch-ups, they begin to rust. The main part of the sill is covered with plastic, but even here corrosion is not excluded. Arches cavities should be inspected for cleanliness and general condition. Usually cars with air suspension are washed from underneath quite regularly, so old dirt may indicate a lack of attention. Hood and windshield frame usually suffer not so much from age, but from damages. R-class perfectly suits on a roll of a car for traveling, and the highway inevitably gives chips and damages of paintwork. And the fifth door is one more classic place. Rust here crawls out from under the chrome molding over the license plate, and there, paint is sometimes chipped and bubbled along the lower edge. However, all these problems of well-maintained cars are still at the stage when everything can be corrected. A few more problems can bring a traffic accident. Not all elements can be bought non-original, and the prices for the original are predictably high. For example, the front bumper costs more than 50,000, and the fender, about 40, but there are replacements for it for 12. The hood is also available for only 35,000 instead of 70 to 90,000. The headlight costs from 45 to 50,000 for basic pre-wrestling optics to 100,000 for restyling by Xenon, and everything is strictly original. Fortunately, you can buy a windshield from 10,000 instead of 50,000 for a firm. But it is necessary to remember that less popular body parts can bring a lot of surprises. For example, if you are not lucky to damage the fifth door, a new one costs 90 to 100,000 and is brought usually under the order. And if on some M-class or GL you can buy anything at a local dismantling, then here and second-hand spare parts will almost certainly have to be ordered from abroad. The commonality of the R-class and M-class platforms implies similar suspension schemes, double wishbone at the front and multi-link at the rear. And some levers are interchangeable, for example, the front upper arm. Prices for original spare parts are expectedly great. The lower front lever in an assembly costs about 60,000, its rear silent block as much as 20,000, the upper lever 20 more, and the rear levers and rods will cost 7 to 15,000 each, not counting the large lower one for 25. However, firstly, the range of non-original parts completely solves this problem. The front lower arm in the assembly can be bought for 9 to 20,000, its rear silent block for 3 to 5, the upper lever for 4 to 8, and the rear, 2 to 5,000 per piece. Well, and secondly, you can often do without replacing the silent blocks, which are offered including the original, rather than changing the entire lever. However, all this does not mean that you cannot pay much attention to the suspension when choosing, taking into account the large volume of parts. The parts alone will cost a lot, and the work will cost a lot. Mercedes-Benz R-class 2010 to 13. Well, the most expensive and frightening thing in the chassis is, of course, the air suspension, which many people still perceive as something impossible to repair. Prices for original parts additionally make it creepy. The front air strut complete costs about $100,000, and the rear cylinder, $30,000. However, the assortment of substitutes in here is very wide, and to repair pneumatic long ago learned. For front racks you can even buy cylinders separately for $7,000 to $15,000 or choose a non-original rack in an assembly for $20,000 to $50,000. And rear cylinders cost literally from $3,000 to $5,000 to $15,000 to $20,000. That is, there is a choice for almost every taste and purse. Separately, it is worth checking the compressor. It, of course, can also be bought non-original for $20,000 to $50,000 instead of $60,000 to $80,000, but it is better to immediately stoggevat this money when buying. By the way, the usual passive shock absorbers will not save huge sums, even if you leave aside the original ones from $30,000. A few quality substitutes will still cost $20,000 to $25,000 per piece. Brakes on R-class are also from ML, 2-piston calipers in front and single-piston calipers at the rear. By the way, the R500 with V8 engine also has floating brackets, only the diameter of discs is larger, 375 mm against 330 to 350 on less powerful ones. Well, 2-piston monoblocks are available only exclusively to the rare R63 AMG. Expendables cost quite earthly money. For example, front brake discs even in the original version can be bought for $6,000, and analogs are available from $2,000. Rear discs with a diameter of 330 mm can be ventilated or solid, but it affects the price little. It is $8,000 to $10,000 for the original, and from $3,000 for a substitute. Expensive technical solutions like SBC, there are no brake lines on these Mercedes, so it remains to inspect the brake lines and assess the operability of the parking brake. Steering is also easy. If oil is clean, and the pump does not howl and does not hint otherwise on soon end of its resource, there should be no problems. Besides, owners of R-class are less inclined to installation of big and wide non-standard wheels than owners of related crossovers. That increases potential resource including steering control. Breakdowns will not upset too much. If you have not bought Mercedes on the last money, the pump for Popular Motors V6 can be bought non-original for $10,000 to $15,000, and the restored rack will cost $30,000 to $70,000. However, it is possible to rebuild own one for comparable sums. The all-wheel drive scheme here is quite advanced for a minivan. It was inherited from M-Class and implies a permanent all-wheel drive with interaxle differential. Of course, there can't be a downshift here, and inter-wheel locks, offered for a crossover, this car doesn't need. There are no obvious weak points in transmission, so it is necessary to check everything and at once to bargain, if necessary, for the cost of front or rear gearboxes reassembly, transfer case repair or at least service of cardan with replacement of joints and selection of rear suspension bearing. The R-Class had one gearbox for all occasions, a 7-speed 722.9 called 7G-tronic or 7G-tronic Plus. Over time it has become quite reliable, but the R-Class was one of the first models to feature this automatic transmission, which means an increased risk of childhood illnesses. The key ones are overheating due to high operating temperature and active oil contamination with wear products, including torque converter lockup pads. Installation of a large external radiator and oil replacement once in 40 to 50,000 kilometers are good for the automaton, although, taking into account the age of early cars to think, probably, it is necessary to overhaul, and probably not the first. And it will be not cheap, so it is impossible to save money on diagnostics of the box in any case, especially that it is diagnosed well. You can read more about numerous potential problems of this box in our material on choosing a used M-Class, the list of engines in. The R-Class includes different variants. The first one is a good, but old and overpowered V8 with the Index M113, which was installed on the early R500. Here 5 litres of volume, 306 horsepower of power and a potential resource of 300 to 400,000 kilometers, and even more. True, such indicators are achievable under the condition of using good oil and gasoline, as well as attention to the tightness of the intake and cleanliness of the cooling system. And all this is overshadowed by the age of cars in 14 to 15 years, which does not allow to be sure of anything. The second option is the most popular V6 with the index M272 and related V8 M273. However, here popularity, unfortunately, does not mean reliability. We told about the problems of these motors in a separate material. Separate material to summarize, this is an unreliable chain timing, prone to stretching and chain jumping, as well as very expensive. To replace, problems with the intake manifold flaps and a tendency to scoring of the cylinder piston group. In general, here it is necessary to lay down the budget for the most thorough diagnostics, including obligatory endoscopy, and also the subsequent service with replacement of timing, which is almost guaranteed to cost in six-figure sum. Well, the third option is a 3-litre OM 642 diesel engine in different boost variants, from 224 horsepower in the early to 265 horsepower in the later cars. It, perhaps, can be considered the best variant with correction for age and cost of elimination of arising problems. There are almost no claims to reliability of the diesel, but the resource of injectors, fuel injectors, EGR system, and turbines, especially with variable geometry, is not eternal, and the price of repair is often exhilarating. Besides, it is very fond of chipping to increase dynamics, and resource at such manipulations becomes much more unpredictable. Well, and endoscopy at diagnostics also will not be superfluous. After a brief excursion into the R-class's tech, it's clear that it is indeed identical to its sister crossovers in many ways, and the rules for choosing a used version are very similar to those we've laid out for the GL. The diesel motor becomes the only logical choice for those who do not want to pay transport tax for 306 horsepower and feed a 5-litre gasoline V8. Given a budget of 1.2 million rubles, you can look for a restyled car with mileage up to 200,000 kilometers and a minimum number of owners. About like this, the main thing that Autoteca confirmed the absence of serious accidents, honesty of the number of owners and transparency of mileage. In this case, the purchase of R-class instead of M or GL promises a loss only in image. But the savings of 500 to 800,000 can pay it off, can't it? In conclusion, the Mercedes-Benz R-class offers a unique blend of luxury and practicality at a significantly lower price point than the GL. With its spacious interior and comfortable ride, it presents a compelling option for those seeking a premium vehicle without breaking the bank. However, potential buyers should weigh the trade-offs in terms of performance and modern features compared to newer models. Ultimately, if you value comfort and space over the latest technology, the R-class at 1.2 million could be a smart investment. Thank you for watching, and we hope this analysis helps you make an informed decision.